All right, so welcome. Today I am talking to Joseph Rodrigues, and you might know him by his YouTube channel, which is also called Joseph Rodrigues. And that's personally how I know him, and or how I was introduced to him anyway. And then since then, I have also become a member of his Flow-Based Prosperity Mastermind. And so I'm very excited to have him on. And so, yes, Joseph, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome, Kate. It's a blessing and joy to be here and enjoy this conversation with you today.
Absolutely. So, yes, I'd love to hear just a bit about maybe you can tell us a bit about yourself and about your journey.
So I'd like to relate this over to generating magic, which is your theme, a wonderful theme. And I relate to that because in 2004 was when I started to consciously generate magic. And one of the first magic that I generated by applying what I learned to facilitate generating magic was getting out of $50,000 debt. Then I got access to more information on generating magic. And then I found my way of applying it over the years, and I was able to use it to move up in my corporate career. And then in 2009, I left my corporate career and I was there for 10 years. And I started an IT business in tech because I did tech corporate IT and I was into computers growing up. I built that business to success in 2009 or from 2009 to 13. And then I started my YouTube channel in 2013. I also got into business consulting at that time. And then I was able to grow my business consulting practice to success, as well as the YouTube channel to success by applying what I learned over the years to generate magic.
I love that. And what I love also, and this is something I actually emphasize a lot when I talk about generating magic, and really when I kind of came up with the whole vision, is that when people think of the word magic, sometimes they think about it in a very narrow way. Like they might think of like potions or magicians pulling rabbits out of hats and or doing a bunch of spells and but or just kind of this whole idea making something out of nothing. But I really think anything magic can be applied to anything. And even these things which you mentioned, so some people might hear words like corporate and IT and think, well, that sounds like the opposite of magic. People might just hear those words and think it's very, I don't know, very kind of mundane or just not magical. But that's just not true. And I think these are all opportunities for us to be able to generate magic like in our own unique ways.
Yes, I agree. It's really how we choose to live life, and we could live it. So, the word I tend to use a lot nowadays, and you're a member of Flow Based Prosperity, the mastermind service, is flow. So, I reconcile it as flow. So, I call it a flow based life. And a flow based life does feel like a magical life. I get to do what I love to do, I get to do it my style. It happens to be fun, joyous. And I do find that interesting opportunities show up, interesting experiences happen. And I find that that increases more so as I make flow a priority. So over the years, the magic that has been generated are authentic, wonderful life experiences. And these kinds of successes, and even during the journey, the relationships that have been formed, the life experiences, I call those very magical because they have been, let's say, a lot different than prior to accessing this information, in the sense that before it felt very stress based, force based, we could say very cut dry.
Mhm.
I wasn't having enough fun and joy and bliss and happiness. And by applying this information, I started to experience it more so this way.
Yes, I love that. And this actually brought to mind another thing that you teach in our mastermind, which is the whole idea of resourcefulness. And this is also, even though I didn't think of that exact word when I thought of generate magic, that was kind of the general concept, is seeing yourself and seeing everything in your life, like all of your experiences, all of your unique qualities, seeing all of that as being a valuable resource. And so
Yes.
you can use all of these resources to generate magical experiences for yourself. And so instead of so instead of thinking of it as making something out of nothing, it's really seeing it's like making something out of everything. I think is a better way to look at it. And everything is a valuable resource. And this is what you talk about a lot too, is that nothing is a waste. Like even an experience that we could view as being a challenging experience or even as a failure or as a huge mistake, it's actually not a failure or a mistake because it actually provides a valuable story, which we can then apply in order to help others in achieving their mission.
Yes, I agree. And that to me is magical.
Mhm.
So you're a fan of the hero's journey, and we
Absolutely.
know about the magic elixir.
Mhm.
So there are many magic elixirs that we can discover in the stories, in our experiences in life, challenging situations, traumatic situations, certain situations that if we share what it is that we learn from the experience, for example, what happens is we facilitate wonderful relationships, conversations through the relatability. And that's magical.
Mhm.
It's interesting. Before, I didn't think that my stories were helpful or valuable or interesting. Yet I found that that wasn't necessarily true if I look at it through the lens of what can I share from my experience that can be beneficial for another person and even infuse it into what I'm doing. For example, when I had my IT business, I found that a lot of the deals, the business, the relationships were formed through the facilitation of the service where I would share my stories with the clients, the relatability. And I would share it in a way where I was excited to talk about it. And I found that it was very childlike. And the lessons that I had learned from those experiences were relatable for them in some shape or form. And then when they applied those experiences, or we can say more accurately, in relation to the hero's journey, those magic elixirs, either verbatim the way I shared it or in their way, they too started to experience more magic in their life. In other words, I found the magic in those experiences. I shared it with them, which is the magic elixir. And then they took the magic elixir and then they too started to have similar kinds of experiences. We could say, very practically speaking, is they applied it in their business life, personal life, etc., and their life improved. They experienced more flow in their life, more happiness in their life.
Absolutely, yes. And I think we as humans, that's how we tend to connect with one another. And also I think that's just kind of how we make sense of the world in terms of
Yes.
stories. Because we can hear a lesson and we can hear the lesson many times, but I feel like until it's actually applied, what like woven into a narrative form, sometimes it can feel like just a bunch of abstract concepts, or it's hard to really kind of place ourselves like in the center of it or to figure out how it really applies to us. And the way that I relate to it in terms of narratives is if you're reading a book or you're watching a movie, you really start to form an identification with that character. And you see the character going through their challenges and their struggles, but at the same time, you see how it all kind of like fits together. You see how it's all part of this a masterpiece, really. Like it's all, and that's
Yes.
what I like to emphasize to people is that your life story is a masterpiece.
Yes.
And if you think of stories like Shakespeare's plays that we consider masterpieces, or a lot of classic works of literature like Moby Dick, and there's moments in these stories that are very tragic, that are very painful, but then when you zoom out and you look at it as a whole, like it just has like this integrity to it. Integrity in the
Yeah.
sense that everything is like integral, like everything connects and forms part of a harmonious whole. And so we can really see like the beauty and the purpose in it.
Yes. And we have, as you mentioned, plenty of these stories that we could infuse in our conversations, which facilitate transformation. I learned this through my years in my IT business and more so during consulting, because what happened was I realized that it was more interesting for me at a particular point, let's say. It was follow my bliss. I like to follow my bliss, or as I say, make flow a priority. I found that it was my next phase at a particular point of my IT business to go into consulting and teach and facilitate transformation in sales, marketing, operations, finance, and leadership based on my experience and the stories. And what I found was when I gave direct instructions, like do this, here's a funnel, step by step, they wouldn't do it. And I would get kind of frustrated by it. And then I took an inventory and I said, when was transformation facilitated? And I found that it was when I infused my stories into the training, the presentation, the consulting, etc., which I had learned from my IT business. And then, and by that I mean the practice of infusing it, facilitating deals, I also felt was applicable in consulting. So then when I started to share my stories during the consulting and have a dialogue, like how we were doing right here, sharing stories, then it actually facilitated transformation to the point, as you had mentioned, why I believe is the relatability. Like when we watch movies, for example, or read books. A transformative book for me was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. A transformative movie for me was The Count of Monte Cristo. Ever seen that one?
Not, but I know you mentioned it before.
Yes. I noticed a noticeably behavioral change after reading, and actually, more accurately put, I was listening to the audiobook of The Alchemist, and I noticed behavioral change and transformational change after listening to the audiobook. Same with the book, more specifically. And I believe there's a book on it, The Count of Monte Cristo.
You're right. It is a book
Movie.
based on a book.
It's a book, right? Based on a book. So after watching the movie, I noticed visible transformation, visible behavioral change. And now, as we're talking about this, we put two and two together. We say, oh, it was articulated in there. The story was relatable and something changed. We can say some programming had changed in the subconscious mind, which is what I found to be something that was very effective to focus on in a particular point of consulting. As I mentioned in the earlier stages, I would get frustrated.
Mhm.
But then I said, you know what? Let's take a step back here. The goal is to facilitate transformation. Let's use a different approach, let's say resourcefulness. There's always an approach that can be helpful. And what I found was when we would share these stories, a change would happen, beliefs would change, the individual's identity would shift, transformation would happen within the individual. And now all of a sudden, they're doing the things that they love to do and they're getting results. They are learning how they learn. And so I started to focus more so on the subconscious mind. And that's when I created in 2018, after having the experience of consulting from 2013 to 18, my subconscious mind program. And from there came another whole slew of initiatives related to it, like coaching, consulting, flow-based prosperity. As you know, in flow-based prosperity, we talk about these things. We have conversations about whatever. Anyone is free to bring to the table whatever they would like to talk about, because I trust that that's part of the journey. If I said, no, you have to, let's talk about finance spreadsheet or sales funnels, although we can talk about it, and at times we do, I find that by having the conversations that have the magic in it, the stories in it, the life experiences, it facilitates transformation, which is one of the reasons why I am a huge fan of conversations. And I brought it up a few times on my channel. I'm a fan of the Robert Dilts sleight of mouth language patterns and just language patterns in general. Language, and the book that he released was called Sleight of Mouth, The Art of Conversational Belief Change. Because I find that through conversation and storytelling is part of it, transformation happens. And it happens in a fun way too, because we have a lot of fun on flow-based prosperity, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And so that's magical, you see? It's a magical experience. People genuinely love to engage in these kinds of conversations, which I call flow-based conversations. Transformation happens, and it doesn't come off as force-based interrogation, shaming, condemning, rather exploratory. And through the exploratory adventure of the conversation, we could say, the hero's journey of the conversation, change happens.
Yes, and that's what I love so much about your mastermind. I have to say, it's unlike anything else that I've ever done. And I've been involved in many masterminds and many group programs over the years. And I don't want to bash like any of those other programs. Like I think they all have their place and they all served me. They were all kind of right for me at where I was at that point in my life. But what I appreciate is just that it kind of brings like everything together because like before the majority of programs that I was involved in, it was very much siloed in that it was all just people interested in energy work or all just people interested in being writers or coaches. And so I like your group is that it brings together people from a really vast array of backgrounds. And so, for instance, I noticed that a lot of I'm both I do both writing and coaching, and I noticed that people that kind of fall into both of these Venn diagrams, you could say,
Yeah.
we tend to struggle with technology, or at least I do. I don't want to speak for everybody, and so it's helpful that in your group there's actually a lot of people that are really good with technology, and so then we can all kind of help one another. And it becomes very collaborative. Like some people might approach me and say, I need some help with my website copy, and that's something that I'm able to help them with. So I just love this collaborative approach, and I think it just makes business like so much more fun because I think entrepreneurship, it can be very lonely, especially when you work from home. It can feel very isolating. And then whenever you experience any sort of like challenge, you can feel like very alone. Like I know that's how I felt before I was in your group. Like I was the only person experiencing this. And there were many times when I would actually step away for weeks, sometimes months, because it would just get to be like too much for me. Like I was like, I can't handle this anymore. And so it's helpful to be able to connect with people who are going from similar experiences, so you kind of learn that you're not alone, but at the same time you're able to kind of pull from your own resourcefulness and you're able to kind of lift one another up, which is what I really appreciate.
Well, I'm happy to hear that. I'm happy you appreciate that. Thank you for acknowledging that. And yes, everybody has access to relationships, resources, and part of the pool of resources that they have access to is their life experience, their sometimes I refer to it as intangible assets, their knowledge, their expertise, their stories. And what I aim to do, and this is true for flow-based prosperity and in relationships in general in my life, is to facilitate valuing these areas. And then that's part of the fun of doing this, I find, is that people naturally bring to the table, as I always say, there's no shame in condemnation. They naturally bring to the table these assets, relationships, resources, and wonderful connections are formed. And it's a playground. And we can say it's also very magic, and we generate magic in the playground
Yes.
by allowing space for that to arise, allowing space. We release the tension. We accept each other the way we are. And then everyone feels comfortable to share, discuss. And as mentioned, not just in the mastermind, I committed to, as part of making flow a priority, to also have this kind of experience in personal relationships, friendships. And one can say, be adamant about that, as in if it doesn't fall within that criteria, which to me is authentic, then that's okay. I choose to facilitate, I choose to be in these kinds of communities, relationships, etc. And then what we naturally see arise is creative ideas, innovation, distinct ways of looking at things, reference experience infused into stories. And then what also ends up happening, interestingly, as you've noticed it as well, is they go on to connect with each other and further this. And so when they create videos on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, whatever platform, or any other kind of content, then they share their stories. They feel comfortable sharing their stories. And they also then with their audiences, their clients, their team members, et cetera, they find that this kind of experience spreads.
Yes. Yes, I think the no shame, no condemnation, I think that's huge. That's one of my favorite aspects of your program. And because I felt like in other programs like I've been involved with in the past, there would be certain things that I would want to bring up, but I would be kind of afraid to bring it up because I would already be kind of thinking like I know what they're going to say, and also just kind of feeling bad about myself. Like I've kind of slipped up from whatever thing that I'm supposed to be doing. But I find when you actually talk about it, like in the process of talking about it, it kind of like opens up new pathways. And I also kind of relate it to the rough draft of a novel. And when you write the rough draft, it's going to be like a little bit messy, but you're just getting it out there. And then by getting it out there, it gives you an opportunity to keep further refining it and building it into whatever it is that you want. But you have to get it out there first. Like if you're just kind of repressing and kind of like having this internal tug of war, like, oh, I'm thinking this thing or I'm feeling this thing, but I know I shouldn't be thinking this way. I know I'm in whack mode or whatever it is, or and shaming yourself, it's like it kind of stays like trapped within you, and then there's never like an opportunity to release it and then kind of use it to kind of move on to the next stage. It's like you just kind of stay stuck in a loop.
Great awareness. I'm so glad you have realized that. And yes, so the aspect of no shame and condemnation is very helpful, practically speaking, as you just mentioned. And I had discovered this by personally going into situations that were fearful and then discovering the magic elixir in those situations. The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. So through the repetition of placing myself in fearful situations intentionally, this is the key, intentionally. I don't just do fearful things. There's an intention. By that, I mean specifically for entrepreneurs, it could be sales. It could be doing more presentations. It could be, for example, fearful to do a conversation like this if it's your first time. And If it is fearful for you, congratulations. If it's fearful for me, congratulations. Because I genuinely desire to do, you genuinely desire to do the things you love to do. And sometimes it appears that fear generates the resistance. And if we can say that's fine, that I experience fear, no shame and condemnation, we find that that fear dissolves. Or we can say that the fear is not as pronounced to the point where it seems to hold you back from taking the step. Now, from the repetition of doing this again and again, personally, I found that there was meta belief, you could say. There was the, if I did it and it didn't go in accordance to plan, whatever the plan may be, it could be whatever the outcome,
Mhm.
then it's not good enough, or shame and condemnation. So I started to say, okay, that's just adding resistance now to doing the things that I love to do, which can be fearful at times. I genuinely desire to do the things I love to do. I find that there's a lot of transformation in doing the things that you love to do. There are magic elixirs there that I get to benefit from greatly, and I get to share with people, and they get to benefit from greatly. So, how can I release some of that resistance? And I said, what if afterwards, if it didn't go in accordance to plan, or no matter how it went, I accepted myself? So, in business, for example, if I did a conversation with a prospect and the deal went through, great. It was fearful. I had the conversation, the deal went through, I acquired the client, great. Now, if the deal didn't go through, great. Now, a person may think, what do you mean? You want the deal to go through? Certainly, I do. Although I have found that by accepting both of these potential outcomes, then what I find is that I'm more likely to do the things that I love to do, which for me at that time was sales, and I've done this for public speaking, etc., because there was no shaming and condemning at the end. So there was no condition that said, if you get this particular outcome, you acquire the client, then no shame and condemnation. But if you get this other outcome, then shame and condemnation. And I say that's an illusion. And why I say it's an illusion is because once that belief was released and I accepted myself unconditionally, we could say, then it was easier and easier and easier. Now, from experience, from having done many things that were like that, when I had the intention to put flow-based prosperity together, I had had not only many reference experiences, and I continue to do these things, by the way, the journey continues. I also work with many that, upon this key distinction of valuing whatever outcome, appreciating every outcome, because we could explore that if you'd like, because let's say the deal didn't go through, there's optimization data, right? And there's treasure there. So we see from the resourcefulness of that experience many opportunities. I said, you know what? It's time to facilitate this with everyone as well. And so I'm glad you're enjoying that aspect of the service.
Yes, man, so much is coming up for me. And I think that the unconditional acceptance, that's huge for me as well. And I remember it, and you saying this in one of your videos as well. Like, if I get the text message, great. If I don't get the text message, great. And it's so simple, but so powerful at the same time. And I like relating this to repetition as well. And more so each day, I'm starting to discover that this whole life experience, at least for me, is really just about remembering. And it's like there's this core truth, and that we're this divine being having this human experience. But then there's a lot of nuances within this truth, and I feel like they all kind of converge in the end. There's a unification point, but it's really just reinforcing over and over again. And I used to feel like a great deal of shame whenever I would have this breakthrough, and then I would fall back into these old ways of thinking. And so, for instance, the deal didn't go through, and then I would beat myself up, and so then I would think, oh no, here you go again, falling back into the old patterns. And it's like, no, every moment is a clean slate. And really, this is just like a moment, an opportunity just to remember again. And I think for all of us, we all kind of have certain patterns. And so for me, yeah, the unconditional acceptance is like a really big one. So just kind of having some grace with myself because I distinctly remember like one of my very earliest memories, I must have been maybe three, was just kind of this feeling that there was something wrong with me. And like literally the thought was kind of like I was like a factory defect. And but then if I could achieve these things like external kind of outward achievements, I would like distract people from thinking that there was something wrong with me. And then I would be able to kind of, I wouldn't even go so far as to say love myself, but at least not feel so bad about myself
Yeah.
or just kind of, just accept myself basically. And so I placed a great deal of importance, even things that kind of seemed really minor, like, winning the spelling bee or, winning a tennis match. Like I would place a great deal of importance on it. And my whole idea of like self-worth would be tied in it. And so then when you get into business, I feel like that can be, before I saw it like as a huge challenge. And because every time I would get a rejection or something wouldn't, a deal wouldn't go through the way that I wanted it to, it would just be soul crushing. And but now I just see it, okay, this is an opportunity point. And you've kind of said something similar about entrepreneurship as just being a great opportunity to really just accept ourselves more and to again just kind of come to this knowing that underneath it all that we really are in the divine order of things, that we really are perfect and that everything is perfect. And then everything else, like you, this was another huge breakthrough I had in one of your videos too, that everything else is just nuances.
Yes, valuing the nuances. And you articulated it precisely. And I took a few notes that I would like to explore if you're open to it. I love repetition. So if we relate it to what you mentioned, and let's use the personal experience of dating.
Mhm.
So if you're interested in someone, you meet them, you get their phone number, you send them a text, you go back and forth, and then maybe a few days later, they stop responding to your texts. That could be very challenging for some because, or let's say, it can result in suffering if they're identified to the condition of now this means not happiness or not love or not peace or not bliss, not fulfillment. In that moment is, as you mentioned, an opportunity point. So I valued that over the years. So the repetition. If they responded to the text, great. If they didn't respond to the text, great. In the earlier stages, let's say that didn't make any sense to me. But I said, if I do this through repetition, then eventually it won't bother me anymore. And sure enough, it didn't bother me anymore. And why I recommend this is a practical way of applying what we're talking about here. And even if we go take a step back and we say, okay, a person might actually not want to go and talk to a person that they see out and about, even though they're clearly interested in them. Because we can say subconsciously, they don't want that potentiality of that outcome to happen, where let's say they connect with this person, they engage in text messages, they would like to go on a date with them, but now all of a sudden the person isn't responding as fast or not responding. That's very hard for them because that's very painful for them, let's say. They don't want that experience. And understandably, no shame and condemnation. So then they might not actually go and talk to that person,
Mhm.
or they might not actually go out and hang out with friends and meet people because even though they genuinely want to meet people, and there's nothing wrong with them. It's just this belief identification, as I call it, a condition. So they can embrace the challenge. They can say, now, if they would like to apply what we're talking about here, which is what I did, which is what you do, is you take the opportunity and you accept whatever happens, whether it be they go on a date with you, they respond to the text messages or not. As a practice, as a practice, repetition again and again and again. And what we find then, what I found in my life, what I found with working with many people on this is they find that they're, we can say all of a sudden more social. They were always social.
Mm-hmm.
They may just were fearing an outcome. They
Mm-hmm.
were afraid of an outcome. So one could say they were afraid to enter the cave because of fear. No shame and condemnation with respect to fear. By applying this, they see someone they're interested in, they start a conversation because they have no attachment to outcome. If the conversation goes in a direction where it's mutually beneficial, great. If the conversation doesn't go in the direction of, let's say, what they would have liked it to be, let's say go on a date with this person, great. They feel great unconditionally because they're great. They feel unconditional love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment, practically integrating the spiritual truth physically, emotionally, mentally, practically integrating it into their life. And to also add to that, you were talking about no shame and condemnation of, let's say a person were to take what we're talking about here and apply it right now. And they say, okay, well, I'm going out. We're recording this on Friday. So they're saying, I'm going out tonight.
Mm-hmm.
And they go out with their friends and they see someone they would like to talk to. And they say, well, I want to apply what Kate and Joseph were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
But now all of a sudden fear, like all of a sudden we can say, not allowing themselves to do it because they are identified with a fear-based belief. They may shame and condemn themselves. They may say, look, I can't even do that. It's a simple step. And what I teach in that regard is that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Accept yourself at that moment, even, right? Because what ends up happening then is through the repetition of that, you will do the authentic thing. So there's many opportunity points we could say to release shame and condemnation. One could be after you had that conversation, you're on the text messaging
Mm-hmm.
phase, let's say, and it didn't go according to a particular plan, no shame and condemnation practice there. No matter what the outcome is of when you have the conversation with the person, if you're interested in talking with them, no shame and condemnation. Even if at times you didn't do it, you saw someone that you're interested in talking to. And by the way, I like giving the dating advice kind of relatability topics, let's say, because many are interested in that who contact me, and I trust you as well. Many people like to go online for dating and relationship advice, so I like to explore that as well on my channel. This is also true for business. Someone would like to reach out to a prospective client on LinkedIn, on Instagram. And so through the practice of treating this, what we're talking about here, as a spiritual catalyst, as you know, I always say, treat entrepreneurship like a spiritual catalyst. A relationship is a spiritual catalyst. Art is a spiritual catalyst. You get to be more as you are,
Mm-hmm.
having released these beliefs through these opportunity points by embracing the challenge.
Mm-hmm. I
And that to
love
me is magic. That's alchemy.
it. Absolutely. And what I found too is that in these moments where you're fearing a situation, like you want to talk to somebody, but what's happening is that a lot of it is just kind of building up in your mind, and so it's all just kind of happening internally. And to relate it to reality transurfing, actually, it's kind of this idea of like excess importance, like you're kind of creating this excess importance around the situation, and kind of the more you build it up, the more scary it seems. And but then when you actually go out and just do the thing, there's suddenly like this release. And like you said, like the more that you do it, the easier and easier it gets. And yeah, I remember a time like in my life when I was like a younger, like as a kid, like I was like more social. And then I remember like in middle school that I would get bullied a lot. And later I found out that it wasn't just me. Like everybody was kind of feeling like like they were getting bullied too. So I think that was just kind of the way it's just middle school. It wasn't really anything personal. And I think it was just all people kind of taking out their insecurities on other people or projecting their insecurities on the other people, I think is what a lot of what it was. But then when I got to be in high school, it got me to be very scared of social interactions because I was kind of putting layering all these memories from middle school into the interactions. And even though at that point I think people were more mature and all the things that I was afraid would happen probably wouldn't have happened. But I remember just going days without talking to anybody. And I feel like the more you go on, kind of the more, yeah, the heavier it gets and the more it builds up in your mind. And it wasn't really until I lived in Los Angeles and there were just like people everywhere that I found there were like all these opportunities. And it became, and maybe too because it was strangers as opposed to people that since childhood. It was like there wasn't as much pressure. And I know you talk about this too about being in cities and like talking to everybody that you meet. But yeah, I remember going to the farmers market and there were these ladies that would sell like vintage clothing every Saturday. So I would just go up and talk to them, sometimes for hours. And there was like a yoga studio I went to where I would
That's
just,
fun.
yeah, I would just talk to people there. And it just, yeah, like you said, it just became easier and easier. And at a certain point, I was like, wow, I have like more friends. I made more friends like in the last month than I probably made like in my entire life. And
Yeah.
and I think writing is the same, or doing any creative act is the same way. Like if you haven't done it for a long time, and then you finally, do write a sentence or play a musical note or whatever, and because you're kind of rusty, it's like working out too. If you haven't worked out in a long time, it might be like a little bit awkward at first and you might not like the way it comes out, but it's just like a muscle. And like the more you do it, just the more and more it flows. And I find like it's an iterative process as well. Like like it just kind of builds on each other and then suddenly like I can't stop writing. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And you articulated it wonderfully, talking about magic elixirs, because you had that experience when you moved to Los Angeles. And having that reference experience and now sharing it here on this video. I don't know if you shared it in another video, but if you shared it in another video, then same as that video as in this video, anyone listening to this, they find some relatability to that. That's actually quite common, that in relation to the people that I've met over the years, including myself, where hearing that we've been through something like that, and then hearing your experience and what you did in there, that's the magic elixir. And then you infused it as something that propels you forward in another form of creative expression, which is one of my favorite things to do as well, is discovering the magic elixirs in one area of your life and seeing how you can apply it to another area of your life. Because that's one of the things that I teach on my channel as well is I share my personal experiences and I share my stories. Yet, if we look at it from the lens of how is this applicable, I share a lot of business stories. There are times where I talk about relationship stuff, family stuff, other areas. I generally tend to talk more about business stuff. What I encourage is how could this be relatable for my particular scenario? And it's interesting. What's interesting about that is we actually find creative ways of, let's say, overcoming an obstacle or transmuting challenge into flow, which Mihai Csikszentmihalyi talks about that as well, where challenge meets skill in the book Flow. I love that. By, we could say, being inspired by people that do things in different areas and asking ourselves the question, how can this be applicable in my scenario here? We find a tweak or a way of doing things that may not be discussed in the scope of information available, for example, in relationships. What I mean is, you may learn something in the business world and then say, well, nobody's doing that thing in relationships, yet it works. Or you may learn something in dating or relationships or creativity. And then by thinking in this way of what are ways I could take this and reimagine it, we could say, so that I could apply it in this area where I'm experiencing challenge, the way arises. Because you allow space for that potentiality for, could it work verbatim? Verbatim. It works here. Could it work there verbatim? Or could it work in a variation? And
Oh,
that's part of resourcefulness.
yes, that's what I appreciate so much about your teachings and about the mastermind as well, is a really good sense to tap into ourselves as source. And I feel like context is so important because somebody may present a formula and say, this is the formula that made me $1 million. But there's so much context that goes into it that we're not even aware of, and that that person may not even be aware of. And so I think it's when we're connected to ourselves as source and really just connected to this divine flow, I feel like we're able to kind of stay on top of the information is the best way to describe it. So as opposed to you're kind of plugging yourself into this track and saying, okay, if I just kind of follow this track, then eventually I get to the end. It's like you're as source, basically, you're kind of picking and choosing the components that are most applicable to your journey. And yeah, so I feel like it's just kind of finding what resonates with you. And I feel like that's so crucial and so important, and something that I feel was kind of missing, I guess, in a lot of these other programs I was a part of, where I felt like it was more rigid or more dogmatic. And here it's just kind of recognizing that these are all methods or all different channels, basically, but you're the ultimate selector. You're the one that's in charge, essentially.
Yes, there are infinity ways. I trust you've seen them.
Exactly.
You've seen many, and well, seen them. There's so many more that we haven't seen yet, but we've seen a lot. Being in business consulting for so many years, I've seen a lot. And I have seen many ways that work. Now, what I recommend and teach, and I love how you integrated it with the spiritual truth, is your way is the best way.
Mhm.
This is a treasure hunt, we could say.
Mhm.
You can explore the various ways, the systems, the models, the formulas
Yes.
that people are doing, and we could take an unbiased view in
Mhm.
relation to it. What I mean by that is, you can go in with an inquiry. I trust that my style will arise as
Mhm.
I'm consuming this information, whether it be a book, a seminar, a video, something like that, with respect to business information. And then, sure enough, you find your style that you can start with. You may say, you know what, I'm curious with this. I might not do it the way this person is doing, but
Mhm.
I'm curious about something. And I got plenty of stories of these if you would like to explore. And I'm going to do it my way, and then it leads to the results. Or what I have also seen, and I've done this myself, is I may take the formula,
Mhm.
but with an open mind. What I mean by that is, I'll take the formula and I'll say, okay, I'll use this as a starting point,
Mhm.
but I'm not going to be rigid with this and say I have to force it into this formula, because now essentially I'm limiting myself, again, connecting to the spiritual truth. So I'm going to allow things to arise, optimization points, let's say. And what I find is, one could say, a Frankenstein of, of that particular formula with other formulas, or it could be a variation to that formula that I've never seen before, or some little tweak to that formula, and it works in an authentic way. That's what I mean by your way is the best way. So if we take that unbiased approach, which again is a practice, and one of the ways I practice this is by embracing situations where I am being, let's say, not as I am, or more accurately put, I appear to not be as I am.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that specifically is, it seems that I happen to be identified with a bias. So I'm going to take that opportunity to release the bias because I know that if I release the bias in that area, not identify with that dichotomous belief, it has to be this way or that way. In that regard, perfect example would be when we talk about the text messaging. Then I also notice that in other areas of my life, such as in business, I will be more open for the way to show up. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. And
So
you
I
said,
take as many opportunities. Oh, sorry. What were you going to say?
oh, I was going to say you had a specific story.
I do. Yeah. This is an interesting story. I wanted to share this on my channel, but now we get to share it here. A while back, I was part of the Warrior Forum. You know, the Warrior Forum?
I've heard of it. Yes.
Yeah. So it's an internet marketing forum. And I bought a WSO, Warrior Special Offer. So there are people teaching marketing methods, they're selling tools, etc., usually for people that are interested in marketing entrepreneurs. And so I bought this marketing method. I was curious because I wanted to try something new. I just had this curiosity while I was building my IT business to try something new. And what was being talked about in this marketing method didn't have anything to do with IT, but I thought, you know what? If I just try something, it'll loosen up the grip and some way it'll arise into some kind of success or creativity or something like that. I'm just going to try something. I actually recommend it. I teach it. I do a whole bunch of things that work with repetition. And then I create some space to do exploratory things, try things out. And so what ended up happening was I bought this WSO, and what it taught was to go to universities and put on the desk a printout that says, go to this website and opt in there, and then you can win this prize. And essentially, this website would give you a few dollars or something like that. I don't remember what it is for the leads that you generate. And based on their volume, et cetera, somehow they make money in the back end. But you, as the person doing the referral, generating the lead, you get two, three, $4 or $5. And so I said, oh, that's interesting,
Mhm.
but I don't want to do it that way.
Mhm.
So I said, let me come up with a variation to it. I said, okay, what if I plaster this on the poles in downtown Toronto in a busy area? Just get some posters made, some flyers, and plaster them to these busy intersections where people are walking by. This particular WSO said do it in universities. I said, and again, this one could say it has nothing to do with IT. What does it have to do with IT? But curiosity, I explore things. And what ended up happening was I went to a place where I was staying in the area and I got some printouts because I implemented this. And I ended up connecting with the guy that owns this printing store. So that particular initiative didn't work. I didn't get the opt-ins, it didn't generate any income, but I met him. And he ended up being the person that I would get the printouts for the speed reading workshops that I would also do on the side to develop my public speaking while I was building my IT business. But then he ended up actually offering me office space. So he had a spare office in his area. He ended up offering me office space at a very low discounted price. So I saved money that way by having access to this space. And then he referred IT clients to me because he runs a print shop. So he has businesses coming in.
Mhm.
Him and I would hang out, we would talk. Very interesting guy. We built a relationship. I had an office right beside his. And he would say, yeah, go talk to Joseph. And people would walk into my room. And so that generated more revenue in my business. That is an example of, let's say, thinking unconventionally or doing something unconventional and then optimizing along the way, even if it goes in a radically different direction till it produces success.
I really love that you brought that up, even if it goes in a radically different direction, because
Yes.
I think sometimes in life, at least for myself, I've found because I have a tendency to want to be like creative and unconventional. And so somebody will present me with a framework, and then I'll kind of think, well, I like that, but I want to do it a different way. And then sometimes whatever I do won't necessarily lead to the results that I was expecting. And so then the tendency might be to say, oh, well, I should have just stuck to what they told me to do and not done things my own way. But I think when you kind of open up the pathways a little bit, you can kind of sometimes discover that it actually is leading to results that are successful, but just not in ways that you could have expected. And so it's almost kind of like we're closing off our own pathways in a certain sense, or maybe just kind of declaring defeat prematurely instead of just kind of seeing where the path is going to take us.
Yes. And each time we walk on one of those pathways, we learn things. We learn things about ourselves. We learn things about people, information, environments, circumstances. And those learnings get at times infused, I find, into the current initiatives. I used to listen to the Steve Jobs commencement speech over and over again when I was building my IT business, which may have inspired that move because he talked about when he dropped into the calligraphy class and how that played a role.
Mhm.
He was essentially talking about, and even said it, stay foolish. I like that. So I like doing things, we can say, at times by the book.
Mhm.
And especially if I wrote the book, let's say, and not necessarily especially, but more specifically, we find our methods that have been proven to work with us and they may be consistent for a period of time. There are staples, let's say. I also leave space for curiosity and exploration because what I find is some of those exploratory areas tend to result in business success. For example, YouTube started like that for me. It was an exploratory idea. Let's make a video, put it out there. And then here we are. So I leave some space for exploratory, and those can turn into businesses. And as you had mentioned, they can also provide insights that get infused in the other areas. So let's say I do something repetitively and it's working, and I'm doing some exploratory things. Some of those exploratory things might not go in the direction of, let's say, turning into business success or whatever outcome, but some nuances, this is where we go back to I value the nuances, some nuances that I learned by taking those steps and going in that direction get infused as optimization into the repetitive thing that I'm doing. And at times I have seen a slight variation or a slight optimization increase revenues consistently and considerably, more accurately put, and then consistently as well. Considerably first and then consistently considerable. So that's why I allow space for both. And that's part of the releasing
Mhm.
the dogmatic belief, saying I have to do it this way or that way, and this way is better than that way, and that way is better than this way. Well, one of the things we talk about in flow, which by the way happens while you're in flow, is the reconciliation of divergent and convergent thinking. Divergent thinking is seeing things from many different perspectives, trying new ideas, exploratory. And convergent is putting together well-established solutions that have been known to work, let's say, consistently, but may at a particular point not work anymore. That's fine. So valuing both reconciles as what I call harmonious being, physical, emotional, mental integration to the spiritual source that provides within clarity as to when to diverge, when to converge, and when to reconcile that into something that is, as I had mentioned earlier, Frankenstein
Mhm.
or some kind of nuance point variation to what you're doing or something radically new, something, a new thing. I'm open to it.
Mhm.
Could be in the next few years or so, I may get involved with another initiative in business,
Mhm.
and that's fine. That could happen, may not happen. What I value is this moment now. and being in flow. And step by step, by repetition, things happen. Perfect example is right now, I'm deeply engaged in this conversation with you. I'm enjoying this conversation with you. This is exactly where I desire to be. If I don't desire to be here, but I desire to be somewhere else, that's worth exploring. Why is it that I do things that I don't love to do? But I genuinely desire to have this conversation with you. It's fun, it's fruitful, it's beneficial. And I trust it's beneficial for you. I trust it's beneficial for your audience as it's beneficial for me. And then after this conversation, the next task, the next initiative, repetition, 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 repetition.
That is very synchronous because I was actually going to ask you about reconciliation, and I feel like you addressed it very well. And so I guess this whole idea of kind of, yeah, leaving things open ended and knowing that the Lord works in mysterious ways. And I think that ties in very much to just kind of being in the now, the eternal now,
Yes.
and having a general idea of how you want things to play out. Even it could be as broad as what is it that you say? Peace, love, bliss, harmony.
Love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Why I say that is everything that I've ever seeked for in life were symbols of love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment.
Exactly. Yes. So and so there's that aspect, and then but then there's also the other aspect of it with entrepreneurship and a lot of. I come from a teaching background too, and so in teaching, it tends to be very process based. And I find that entrepreneurship is the same way in that it's kind of there's always this sort of linear method and almost like you follow these steps and then you get
Have
your
you explored
destination.
Montessori education?
I know you've talked about it. Yes. I love the idea of it. Absolutely.
Yeah, I love it. It's very fascinating. And I found over the years that I gravitated more to that style of learning for myself, and I benefited greatly from it. And so I infuse that style in my coaching, consulting, training, facilitation, and it's been very helpful and fruitful for everyone.
And so I find, I don't know, this kind of gets into, I guess, manifestation teachings as well. And the whole idea, for instance, like if you could just imagine it, and for instance, if you could just imagine the money and then the money will eventually appear, then the question becomes, why are you even doing all these other things? At least that question kind of comes up for me sometimes. And then sometimes how I respond to that is, well, I think life at least for me, I find purpose in sharing my gifts with the world, and I think you feel the same. But yeah, I'm just curious from your perspective how you, I guess, reconcile those beliefs.
Well, since 2004, I've always had a definite chief aim. That's my definite chief aim card. And every one of those definite chief aims were actualized. And at times it was specific monthly income goal. The first one, as mentioned, was get out of $50,000 debt, particular amount saved and invested, etc. On the journey of the journey, on the journey to actualizing it, there were opportunities for what I call mind purification, such as what we talked about, releasing dogmatic beliefs. And when we release these dogmatic beliefs, when we release identification to what is not authentic in the subconscious mind, the identifications, the inauthentic beliefs, such as beliefs of limitation,
Mhm.
or if this person messages me, they that means I am loved, and if they don't, then I'm not loved. We see that's clearly a limitation. So I had these opportunities on the journey. What I enjoyed on the journey was taking these opportunities, embracing the challenge, gathering the magic elixirs from them, and then sharing it with people. And then I also found, interestingly, that it played a role to actualizing this. How so? because my stories, my experiences, even during the times you could say I was going through challenges growing up or in my corporate career, resolving IT challenges, they became the very things that I offered.
Mhm.
Again, the specific technologies, methodologies, including the stories, magic elixirs, etc., full suite that generated that money. The money was a result of my products and services that I created. Now, that's been my experience. So that's how I reconcile it. I say, I value the journey. And as I value the journey, the destination happens. It happens in a flow-based way. So thus I enjoy the journey and the destination, because one of the things, as mentioned, practically speaking, from my experience, is that what I had learned on the journey became what I offered that generated the lavish, steady, dependable income consistent with integrity and mutual benefit. As you know, I love that auto suggestion.
Absolutely. Yes, and that brings to mind this idea that I have that everything is a springboard. And
Yeah.
also, like I said before, that nothing is wasted. And so everything leads to everything else. And really, I feel like the more I think about it, the more it really does fit together. And there really is no contradiction. And so,
Yeah.
so we often hear this idea, right, that a penny is the same as $1 million, right? Or it kind of contains the seed. And so it's like every experience that we have is like a seed for something else. Or another way of saying it is like the part of God also contains the whole of God. And so basically, if you kind of think about it from kind of the hologram approach,
Yes.
and or another way of, I like looking at it from different angles, but no matter how you look at it, it all kind of points back to the same thing. Like Maxwell Maltz in Psychocybernetics talks about, he calls it something else, but it's basically the definite chief aim. So you have the definite chief aim, and then he calls it like the servo mechanism, right? And
Yes.
so, but if you look at it from a spiritual angle, it is kind of like that unseen hand or the hand of God that is
Yes.
guiding you along that path once you have that clear vision. And even when perceived failures happen along the path, he calls it like a corrective mechanism, right? Where it just kind of brings you back to that divine center. And
Yes.
even more so, those failures, like you were saying, they actually become the magic elixir, and they actually become stories that you can then use to empower other people as well. And so it's like pretty much like everything has like a purpose. And I think I like that approach so much more than this approach of I'm going to think about my dream life, and then in the meantime, I just have to live out my crummy daily life and ignore the 3D and keep my eye on the prize and just try to tolerate, what's happening around me. Like I don't like that approach. It just feels very kind of disconnected to me. And I like the connected integral approach so much more.
I love that you brought that up, reconciliation, and you gave a wonderful example. So I reconcile the inner and outer as one.
Exactly.
That's also alchemy.
Mhm.
See the inner and experience it, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, as one, as one. So over the course of the journey to actualizing these definite chief aims, I have found many opportunities to reconcile one perspective with another perspective, which seems to conflict.
Mhm.
Well, it seems that way. How can they be complementary to each other is a great question I like to ask. How can they be supportive of each other? How can they be mutually harmonious? And then the way shows up, sometimes through conversation, sometimes through experience, and then reflecting back. And I said, oh, that is the way, in one of the ways, let's say, it can reconcile. And then I go through the reconciliation every day, step by step by step. There's perhaps many opportunities to reconcile. Even, for example, sometimes I come across information that says it's this way or that way.
Mhm.
I like to embrace the challenge of no matter how persuasive it seems that it's this way or that way, and there seems to be a conflict between the two, explore ways that it could reconcile, and I find the ways. Then what's interesting is after having found those ways, a person may show up in my consulting, for example, or in flow-based prosperity and ask a question
Yes.
that that magic elixir of, we could say, the reconciliation magic elixir in that regard, I share it with them. I say, you know, I had this experience the other day, or I came across this information, I thought about this. And then they say, oh, yeah, that's a great perspective. That's very helpful for me. That helps. Or I take that and apply it and produce results. And I have a story then to share of how I reconcile that.
Yes, I was just going to say that how this skill of reconciliation is like ideal for coaching and consulting.
Yes.
Um, Before I always thought I was like, I don't know how you do what you do. Like you're able, no matter what somebody comes to you with, no matter what field they're in or what they're experiencing, you're always able to come up with some sort of solution for them. And that, by the end of the conversation, they always seem satisfied or at peace. And then I recognize that it's through this act of reconciliation and being able to see that nothing is really in contradiction and that everything really connects back to God or to the divine center. And so there's really nothing that's separate from your experience. You're always able to find that connection point.
Well, thank you for acknowledging that. I appreciate you. You know, one of the inspirations for that was the book The Kabbalion by three initiates. And it spoke about Hermes Trismegistus, who was Thoth in ancient Egypt. So he was known to some as the Great Reconciler. And it was said in the book that people would travel from across the world with divergent viewpoints,
Mhm.
and he would facilitate reconciliation. And I said, that is very inspiring. Thoth was said to be, I believe so, the father of alchemy, the creator of alchemy. So it is alchemy then. And we see the magic that happens as a result of reconciliation, the harmony, new ideas, new innovation, invention, breakthroughs, relationships reconciling through, let's say, I'm inspired by that when they refer to him as the great reconciler. I said, I would like to follow in those footsteps. So, and then that's the wonderful thing about setting the intention.
I love
You
that.
set the intention to, oh, I can be a reconciler, or I can reconcile. It is possible to see reconciliation, even if it physically does not appear that way. It will, or some way, somehow it arises. You start to see it.
Mhm.
And then you start to see it more and more and more and more so. And I've taught this to many consultants actually who had challenges in consulting.
Mhm.
And we discovered that they can benefit from this conversation about allowing for the reconciliation point to arise, we could say, by just trusting, we could say that some way, somehow, and we find exploratory conversations, masterminds, etc., from that intention. If the intention is there is mutual harmony here, there is a point of harmony, we could say, there is reconciliation. I go in with that intention. And I don't sway off that intention because I have found that it's never been known to fail. At times it was more challenging. That's okay. At times it even felt impossible. I thought it was impossible. That's okay because unconditional self-acceptance is really helpful. And then through the repetition of doing that again and again and again, and actually witnessing the reconciliation point, practically speaking, for the consultants, they had clients that had sophisticated business models, or let's use business models as an example. They had sophisticated business models and they were doing a lot of things to optimize their business, but they couldn't find a way to do it. So before this person I'm thinking of, was very troubled by that. He would rack his brain and long nights, etc., trying to figure out a solution, there was this subtle intention that was, let's say, not a pure intention that it couldn't be done or it's impossible or it's going to be very frustrating. When he started to incorporate the way will show up,
Mhm.
there is a reconciliation point. It can happen more and more so easier, faster. What would happen was the clients, when he would go in with that intention, they would dialogue in a way that he, as the consultant, would practice this, which is what I taught him and what I do as well, is no matter what the client suggests, that it's not possible, impossible, to inwardly hold true to that intention, not by arguing with the person, not by trying to prove them wrong or saying, don't think like that or something like that, or shaming and condemning, but rather based on what they share. Yes, and it's something that I learned from improv. Have you
Mhm.
heard that? Yes, and
You, yes.
I I look at it as accept whatever it is that they share, unconditional love, happiness, peace, bliss, fulfillment. Thank you for bringing it to the table, in other words, and trust that there is a way, which may not show up right away. I might not say, oh, here's the solution. It could be something like, well, that's interesting that we've done it this way, or you've done it this way. What I have found with some clients is they have done it this other way. It may or may not be applicable for you. And then they say, oh, yeah, yeah, that way that your client did it, we can actually vary this. And I say, how so? And then they share the variation, and then they find the solution. So it's the holding true to intention. And now here's what I consider the key point. It happens naturally while you're in flow. So, as mentioned, flow is a reconciliation of divergent and convergent thinking, and this happens naturally and authentically while you're in flow, which is why I always recommend make flow a priority, be in your flow, prioritize your flow. And I trust you've noticed this as well, is that while you're in flow, it's easier for you to see that reconciliation point, right?
Absolutely.
And it just plays out as a wonderful theater of conversation, et cetera, of how that is brought to awareness, that reconciliation point.
Yeah, because I think really like only we can really cut off our flow. And the flow I see as kind of our connection point with the divine. Like it's literally
Yes.
like God working through us.
Being
And
a conduit of divine expression, that's the flow.
exactly, absolutely. And it really allows us to kind of have like that higher, like that bird's eye view. And so, yeah, I like keeping those kind of broad intentions, like mutual benefits, like some way, somehow, this will be mutually beneficial for both of us. Because I
Yes.
think when you tend to kind of get in the weeds and try to think about it from a logical perspective, and I think this goes for pretty much anything. You're trying to kind of think about, okay, like what do I need to move around to make this happen? Or when it's dealing with any sort of like personal situation, you're kind of thinking about, okay, how do I get the person to come over to my point of view? And so there's a lot of tension and involved in it, and like a lot of overthinking. And then it's almost like when you back up a little bit, it's kind of like you're allowing all those messy, chaotic parts to come together. Just kind of like
Yes.
I like to think of it as like the director too of a movie, right? And the director is kind of like bringing everybody together, like into this unified vision.
Yes. Yes. And Hermes, so what happened was the Greeks, they went over to Egypt and they made Hermes a god
Mhm.
who was Thoth, as mentioned. And he was depicted at times wearing winged sandals. And one of the reasons why is because of his ability to go into the divine and come back down to earth, into the divine, back down to earth. So we're doing that essentially while we're in flow. We go to the source, access the source, and we bring the insight down.
Exactly.
We apply it, it works, it produces results. And so it is what we were talking about earlier with respect to alchemy, a harmony between inner and outer. There's no conflict between the two.
Yeah, and I think that's also how we reconcile, like having the human experience,
Yes.
and at the same time recognizing the divine perfection behind it all. And I
Yes.
think that's also kind of how you reconcile like non-duality with the seeming duality of the human experience, right? And the seeming separation. And Connor, who's a member of our mastermind, he has a book. I believe it's called Trusting Your Foundation. And he talks about it very well about how, we're these spiritual beings, and we agreed, to come and have this human experience of separation, seeming challenges, but the end goal of all of it is really just to have fun and just to kind of experience what it's like to be like in a body and to experience like physical sensations. And I just really like the way that he put it, because I think sometimes, especially in spirituality, it kind of has like this gravity to it. And we think we're here to learn all these big lessons. And then sometimes we can put like a lot of pressure on ourselves, like, oh, am I really like living my best life? So I
I
think
love that you value reconciling the spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical as one. I find that I practice it. I can feel, I'm aware of what I think, my behaviors, emotional relatability, etc. I have, and over the years, I make this a priority, acknowledge if I bias, and then I adjust accordingly. And then by adjusting accordingly, a lot of this, and more so, I find some esoteric texts that before didn't make any sense to me are crystal clear. I also receive within ways of articulating, and anyone can do this because, as you mentioned, you and I know different, truly. And we are here to, well, I like to say we are here to generate heaven on earth. Let's say the ultimate magic. And we actually are in harmonious relationship with each other. And we, through, for example, sharing our magic elixirs, our stories, it helps people. It helps people reconcile. And what is very helpful is the valuing of physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual, and reconciling it together. I use that as a compass in my life. And I have many ways of reconciling. Let's say if I was feeling like a little disconnected or off center, let's say. And that's okay. No shame and condemnation. We apply that. And then I can refer to any one of the things that I could do, and or I could discover a new way. And it's fun to do that. It's part of my fun because each one of those ways are magical elixirs. And as you had mentioned, some of them may be helpful for some people. Some might not be applicable for another person. And that's fine. I find that as part of this too, of all being in harmony, the people show up that are ready to receive the magical elixirs that we have. So we share it. We share it through these conversations. We share it through our videos, through products and services. And it benefits them. It benefits you. It's a wonderful theater. It's God's play.
I love that. I'm sorry, can you hear my computer?
No,
Okay, good. Yeah, my fan, I don't know, it's like going nuts. And it sounds like really loud on my
we
end.
did say alchemy.
Yes, yes.
There is a process for purification,
Mhm.
transmutation of base metal into gold. Some of it may involve fire. How symbolic.
All right. Well, is there anything else that you would like to share?
Well, I know you and I could talk for many hours. We always have so much fun. I appreciate you for bringing me on to have this conversation. I appreciate each and every one of you for watching. This has been a lot of fun for me. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much. And I will put a link in the description as well to your YouTube channel, as well as your Flow-Based Prosperity Mastermind, which I would highly recommend anybody joining. It is definitely, I would say without the shadow of a doubt, it's definitely been a life-changing experience. Like I literally kind of think of my life now as being like before and after.
Thank you. Happy to hear that. Congratulations for doing the great work. This is the alchemical great work, and you are a living embodiment of it. Thank you.
Thank you.